Hey there, my name's Jordan, and I'm a financial coach and financial planner. And today I'm your host at the Reimagine Wealth podcast, where we share imperfect stories about embodying our values, weaving just system level safety nets, and working to build the world that we want to live in, one where we all get to have our needs met and thrive. Let these be shared learnings that allow you to more deeply explore, experiment, and shift, and that allow us to unlock our collective knowledge. This show is ad-free and available to everyone, and it wouldn't be possible without your love and support. So if you like what you're listening to, please like, review, subscribe, and share the show with those in your community. If you're able, please support my work to produce the show by becoming a paid member of my Substack, which starts at $6 a month. Link to that and more is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get into the show. In this episode, you are going to hear from Diana Gisel Yañez, who is a money coach at All the Colors and a wealth manager at Natural Investments. Diana provides clients with the education that they need to make financial decisions, accountability to take action, and coaching to understand why they do what they do with money. Diana is someone who has mentored me as I was starting my own money coaching business and is someone who I really look up to. So I'm excited for you to hear more about her story and her work. One thing to note in this episode is that my microphone was having a little bit of wonkiness. You might notice it's a little bit hard to hear me, so apologies for that, but I think for the most part it comes through pretty well. Let's get into the episode. Welcome, Diana. I'm really happy you're here. And I know that you've had a chance to listen to a few episodes, so you probably already know what I'm going to ask you. So as much or as little as you'd like to share, I'd love for you to introduce yourself in the context of your money story and share more about how you came into this work.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited. I'm glad that we are covering similar topics because we just have such a different way of telling each story. So it's a joy to be here. My money story. My money story starts with my parents immigrating to the US from Mexico. We didn't immigrate very far, though. We're from Mexicali, so I always joke that my parents moved 10 feet north. We moved into Calexico, so just on the other side of the border. And I grew up a couple of blocks from the literal fence. So I grew up like crossing that border, the fence, multiple times a week because most of my family is still in Mexico. And I actually now spend a lot of my time in Mexico City, most of my time in Mexico City. And because my parents immigrated, we were financially better off than the rest of my family. And I I think I realized that we weren't objectively financially well when we moved to Los Angeles, away from my tiny little agricultural town in Calexico. We moved to LA. And so where I lived before in Calexico, everyone was on discounted food. Like we had food tickets. And when I moved to LA, I had food tickets, but not everybody else did. And I was like, oh, okay, wow, we're in a different socioeconomic status. But yet, when I would go back to visit my cousins in Mexico, I always knew that we were much further ahead financially than they were. And part of my story is that both of my parents are very much rags to riches stories in a way. My dad experienced hunger as a kid. I never did, but my dad did. And my mom also lived in a lot of precarity, not as much as my dad. So part of our money story is having enough to feel secure, like money as a way to safety more than anything else, because in my parents' stories, it wasn't other people that helped as much as it was actually them being able to get financially steady and grounded. And then they eventually became help for other people. But that was like money was a sense of security more than anything else. The kid, I remember I wanted to be the CEO of Walmart because Walmart had decimated our town. So I actually wanted to be the one in control or to have that kind of financial wealth. And my parents were very much all about that. And then I think it was in high school or maybe it was in college that started to shift. Funnily enough, I remember reading the Communist Manifesto with my dad and having him say that like the communism didn't work. So part of Mexico's story is that During the revolution, I think this was in the 1910s, 1920s, they would say, La tierra es del que la trabaja. The land belongs to those that work it. So they gave land back to ejidatarios. They gave land back in different parts of Mexico. And I don't know the story 100% well, but what I came down with, what I learned from my dad about it, was that people were receiving land that was not set up to live on. There wasn't integration. There wasn't like public works that had set the land up. So they were actually not being set up in a way that worked to create stability. And that people ended up getting lost in politics of just like not moving, not being able to move forward because they didn't have the resources for it. So that was his experience of socialism and like social help and that did color the idea of like, yes, everyone's out here on their own trying to figure things out on their own. And in college, I worked at a, now I'm diving into like my work story, but it's also part of my money story of how has my view of money shifted. So from a young age, it was very much about like hoarding, get as much as you can. Money is the only way to security. And then later on, realizing that it didn't fulfill most of your needs. Money can only take care of financial needs, right? And there's a lot of other things that we're asking money to do that money can't do. And in college, I had the experience of working at a broker dealer and feeling like I never wanted to do that kind of job, which is funny enough that now I found my calling doing something very similar, but in a different way. I'm still like in college, I never imagined myself managing other people's money, and now it's a big part of what I do. But what's changed is seeing who I was working for and seeing how we can work for collective good using money. So yeah, so that's part of my money story. A little convoluted, but there it is.
Yeah, no, I love it. Thank you. And I appreciate that you pulled on some pieces where I think, especially in parts of the global South, or people who have experienced cultural revolutions or political revolutions, there is a lot that happens. It also makes me think of talking to Miriam Zoila Torres, who I think you also had on in relation to Cuba. Just some of the things that happened that create a disbelief or disillusionment with some of these political ideologies like socialism, communism, and yeah, it's just making me think a lot about how if you don't invest fully in providing like the wraparound and like everything actually needed to meet people's needs and to make that world possible, um, how it can fall apart or not fulfill the like dreams and wishes that
Mhm.
it's described. And my gosh, I'm just like I love that like your younger inner self was like, I'm gonna be the CEO of Walmart. So
Yeah,
that was just really
my parents had a small store. We worked at a swap meet, and I do remember this. I must have been like 10 or 11 years old, and we were outside of our little store. And every store had someone who was like a greeter, right? And they were just making sure that no one was walking off without paying. That was what the greeter's job was. And my dad told me, you know how Walmart has one greeter? And here there are 50 stores with 50 greeters. Walmart just took away 49 jobs. And again, I was like 10 or 11 years old, where my very, very capitalist dad was telling me how harmful capitalism was.
I mean, it's really true for so many. I mean, for all of us to an extent, like so many people who are living paycheck to paycheck or beyond that, like money is a sense of security and of safety. And I'm curious, like what was it about that broker dealer job or the events leading up? Like, how did that, I'm hearing in your story, your worldview started to shift a little bit. Like, money's not just safety or money's not complete safety. So can you share a little bit more about how that shift started to happen?
Well, I mean, money is still a really clear way of accessing safety. It's just money can't take care of other needs that sometimes we ask it to take care of, right? Like a sense of belonging can't come from money. Senses of care, like you can't really pay for care. So those are some of the ways that it shifted. Whereas for my parents, I don't think it's shifted. Like they still see money as being a way to like fulfill more needs than I see it. And another part is that part of my identity in the past few years that I've really come to identify with is being highly sensitive, and earning money in a way that didn't align with the rest of me would chip away at me. Right, right. So it's like money can be a source of safety, but also how do I not dissociate in order to earn money? Yeah. How do I stay
Right.
integrated?
Ah, yes. And this aligns to two of the questions that I wanted to ask you in this conversation. But since you mentioned being highly sensitive, could you share a little bit about what that means and what does that mean for you as an
I think
individual? Wow.
one of my favorite ways of describing high sensitivity is with the DES acronym. D is for depth of processing. It can be emotional. It can be just like a lot of complexity in the stories, even in the way that I share my background. Like there's all of these threads that I pull in. So depth of processing, depth of feeling. O is for overwhelm. Like a tendency to get overwhelmed quickly because you're taking in so much information. E is for empathy or emotional depth. And S is for sensitivity. And that can be like physical sensitivity. Like, is the light too bright? Is there too much noise? And it's about 15 to 30% of the population. And I've also heard that it's in other species. One of my favorite examples of it is that in some forms, in some types of deer and fish, when they're out counting, like how many fish are there, they have to add 20% because the highly sensitive fish are going to see the sensor. The highly sensitive deer will see the sensor and they're like, I don't know what that is. I'm not going to touch it. So species need these like people who are more sensitive, more aware. It's a little bit of the canary in the coal mine. They're the first ones to be like, something's off. And on the other hand of it, as a person who's highly sensitive, it's like the likeliness to get overwhelmed because you're taking so much information in is part of the deal. But there can also be a big positive is like all of the connections that you're making, the additional creativity. Um, Highly sensitive people tend to be very focused on social justice because of the empathy. Other people's pain is our pain. So when I'm talking about like earning money, like I knew that if I was earning money in a way that was going against any part of my values, then it would feel like I would have to numb in order to do that. And I remember at my last job, for at one point, I was like, I'm gonna have to start drinking to keep doing this job because I was not respecting my clients as much. I was not respecting my work as much. And thankfully, it was a joke, but it was enough of like a joke of for me to be like, no, like I need to shift my direction because this is not working.
Oh my gosh, yes. Thank you for that description. And so much of that, I mean, well, also for listeners, Diana hosts another podcast called Highly Sensitive Money, and it has so many amazing stories, offers so much. And listening to that show made me realize that I think that I also am highly sensitive. So thank you for describing that. Also, yeah, that orientation of like, in order for me to earn a wage or to make a living in this way, it just feels so dissociated or just numb when I think back to it, I'm like, yeah, it was like I was like putting a mask on. I'm like, yes, I'm gonna like perform this dance and go through the motions, and that's what I need to do for 40 hours a week. And I'm curious because you did shift and you did make really intentional changes in your career and how you're earning a living. So could you share a little bit more about the work that you do and how'd you come into that?
Mhm. Yeah, the work that I now do is a third of it. I think it's split into a couple of different thirds, maybe like more than three thirds. But a portion of it is investment management. So I do investment management for high net worth individuals who are very values aligned. I work for Natural Investments, and Natural Investments has been doing this for 30 plus years, 35 plus years. Here, a lot of the times I work with inheritors or people who have sold the business. How can they use financial planning to see how much of their money they can give away? And then the amount that they keep, how can they invest in a way that's aligned with their values, focused on community investing, on a transition away from extractive capitalism to something that works for everyone? That's about a third. And I think the rest of it, the two-thirds of my work is with all the colors. And with all the colors, I do money coaching. So I work with people without wealth, people who a lot of the times for managing debt. How do they manage debt and manage their cash flow? I've worked with mostly women of color entrepreneurs. That's kind of been, as a woman of color entrepreneur, that's been who I've naturally attracted into the work. I also provide workshops to nonprofits, to employee resource groups, where I talk a lot about how do we It's like financial literacy, financial education with an eye towards nervous system regulation. Because money can be such a triggering topic. It's very easy for us to go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, to go into one of these autonomic responses where we're not able to actually listen to it anymore because we're feeling so threatened. If the topic of money reminds you that you have unopened bills or that there's maybe even jealousy within your family or that you're not earning money in a values aligned way. Like if there's a very big negative emotion aligned with money, it's very likely that the person won't be able to stay centered in themselves. And when we're having that kind of stress, our cognitive cortex, our ability to actually think things through long term, make complex decision goes up a little bit offline, maybe a lot offline, depending on how triggered you are. And then it's hard to learn. So when I'm doing these workshops, I start with what does a centered nervous system feel like? And everybody's experienced that. And it's normal for us to go out of a centered nervous system, but then how do we also come back into it? So in these workshops, I want people to experience positive experiences with money, to have positive interactions, because that'll grow our imagination, our ability to imagine that we can continue to have positive experiences with money. So again, it's the investment management, the money coaching, the workshops. I have a self-guided budgeting course. I've done speaking. I do some racial equity consulting. Yeah.
You're one of the people I think of who works kind of across class. And I'm curious, was that an intentional choice? And what is it like to kind of toggle between these two? Obviously, people have a lot of similarities and a lot of differences, but I know that the focuses and problems you're trying to solve can be quite different. So I'm wondering what that's like for
hmm
you to straddle the two.
Well, people's external circumstances may be very different, but their internal circumstance, figuring out how to live day to day, being values aligned or staying in integrity in a system that they're not in alignment with, that's very common. So I focus a lot on the similarities. And at the end of the day, money is very much behavioral more than anything else. It can look like a math problem because it has numbers, but it's really much more of a psychology question to answer, and everybody answers it differently. I also think that just like with food, it's like what works for your body at one point doesn't work at another point. And then if you decide to start, I don't know, powerlifting, you're going to have to do things differently. It's the same thing with money. Like if you move to a different country, if you have children, if you get divorced, and adjusting your behaviors to that new change, everybody needs to do that. It doesn't, the amount you're working with is often, I mean, it's very meaningful, but it's not everything. So, and I really like working cross class because I love diversity and I like seeing what are people's questions across the spectrum of wealth. And they are very different, but again, sometimes they're very similar.
Totally. That's like a lot of our fears and anxieties come from a very common place. And it's the like things we're socialized around money or things we've learned, our attachment styles. I'm curious how, like, so you were at the broker dealer job, and then did you like make the switch immediately, or what was that process like to come
Mm.
into this new career path?
Yeah, so I worked at this broker dealer in 2007, 2008. I left in 2009. So I had the chance of being there during the big, like Lehman Brothers was going under. Merrill Lynch was purchased by Bank of America. And at the time, my mom was going into foreclosure because she was part of the subprime lending mortgage. Like her credit score was subprime and they had loaned her. And then the house devalued incredibly in 2008. So it was interesting to like see giant banks get bailed out, but my mom got blamed for it. Like my mom, not specifically, but she got the fall for it, or many people in her situation that went to foreclosures. And I thought, gross, no, never. I'll never work in finance. I love that firm being like, that was good for me to see what the corporate world was like and let me go in the other direction. At the time, I was volunteering at a homeless shelter and I was given a peer mentor position because I dealt with a lot of depression And so I was someone else who was helping people who were going through mental health challenges, taking them to the doctors, being support, teaching them how to take public transportation. I was there for about a year and a half, for about a year. And I had to decide if I was going to go back to school for a master's in either social work or marriage and family therapy, and I already had a master's. I had a master's degree in demography. So it was like, do I want another master's? And also at the time, I was 23, 24. It was emotionally really difficult to be working with so much that was beyond what I could help with, beyond what the doctors could help with, because it was really more systemic than anything else. Like a lot of the things were systemic. Some of the things like addiction is very personal, but also it's a solution to move towards when there aren't other solutions around. So I loved that and moved the other extreme into demography. So I was working at a county government, and that work was not as emotionally difficult for sure. It was just me and numbers, but I missed people. So I felt very much like Goldilocks. From one end, there were too many people, or yeah, there was too much like emotional things. And the other thing, it was too much numbers. And then I moved into working at
What is demography? I actually
demography.
don't know
Oh,
what that is.
yeah. Thank you. It's population projections, population studies. Where have, let's see. Yeah, the study of demography is like, how are people changing? So from the demography department or the demography county work, I started working as a profit analyst at a manufacturing firm. So it's a place that made boxes. And I was there for a year when I met a certified financial planner at randomly a Toastmasters event. And she gave me a brochure on how the CFP is like a great career for women. Like certified financial planning is a great career for women. And I had always been interested in personal finance, but because of my experience in the broker dealer, like I was like, gross, I don't want to work there. So at this point, I had been like 4 years out of college. I had worked at four different places. It's like, I'm tired of starting at the bottom over and over. The perfect job does not exist. Let me just be happy enough with this profit analyst work. And I did work with people and I worked with numbers. And then I did a lot of volunteering so that I would find meaning, because that's also important to me. And when she gave me this brochure, I started slowly like learning more about CFPs, really finding out, is this something that I could do? And I decided to, I think after a year of researching it, because again, I was like hesitant to switch again, especially because I liked the salary and I liked the team I was working with. I started taking the CFP classes while working as a profit analyst. And that took about 2 years. And between my job as a profit analyst and then my first job as a financial advisor, I took a year off to finish studying for the CFP, like take the class, to do a volunteering in Costa Rica. And it was a really good experience because I learned how to spend my savings. Before that, I've always been very much like of a money hoarder because again, I grew up with like money is security. I was always having. So by the time I finished that year, I must have been like a few $1,000s in debt, which I had never gone into consumer debt over something like that. But I'm happy that I did. I was 30. So I always joke that like my 30th birthday gift to myself is a year-long sabbatical, depleting my savings. At least I didn't go into my retirement account, but I remember being like, I can tap my Roth if I need to. And from there, I started working at a lovely firm that was not fully values aligned, but the first couple of years would really felt like it was. I moved to Philadelphia from my native Southern California. And I think it was during the pandemic when after George Floyd had been murdered, and there was so much more talk of race that I started to really shape at the firm. I do remember though, and I have a conversation in my podcast with Pamela Capelot. I had reached out to her 2 weeks into my job, and then like all of my clients are white. Like I knew that all of my clients were going to be white, but really all of my clients are white. And Pamela was like, "Yeah, welcome to the world of finance." And I think I had one set of clients who were no, I had two. there were two out of like the 90 clients that I served who were not white. One of them I've stayed in touch with actually since working there. I think when I was looking at the decision whether to grow with that firm or whether to do something else, that's when I was thinking if I want to grow with this firm, I'm going to have to start drinking because I really did feel like I had to leave my values at the door. Um, yeah, yeah. So that was what brought me to where I am now.
Yeah, I really appreciate the like windy path that it is to get
Mhm.
here. And also like what you're speaking to with related to the racial wealth gap and I mean really like wealth divide that's upheld by systemic conditions that you were also alluding to. Yeah, and it is true that majority of the clients that I work with are white, and that is
Mhm.
yeah, speaking to the conditions that we're living in. Was that part of the reason that you decided to do money coaching, or can you share a little bit about how did you make the
Mhm.
choice to start All the Colors?
I started all the colors during the pandemic as like a side project. A couple of friends had asked me to coach them, and I started learning like what does it look like to coach people with money without wealth, without like access to $2 million portfolio. And I wanted to do group coaching. That was really what led me into leaving my old position. It ended up, like, long story short, it ended up not working for me, but I'm glad that it was the impetus that moved me into this. I know that, so I mentioned it earlier that money is much more about behavior, and the easiest way to change behavior is to join a group of people who are doing the thing that you want to do because we're social creatures. So if you want to become vegan, joining a group of vegans will be really helpful. If you want to start doing yoga, like going with people and seeing them do it. And also, money is such a taboo topic, but I figured that learning how to talk about it with strangers would make it easier for people to then start talking about it with their internet ones and to start having more deep, in-depth conversations. Personally, I don't have the stamina to keep long-term group projects going. I think maybe I will at some point, but I didn't have the stamina to like gain the audience. So it didn't work. However, I did learn a lot during it and it brought me to entrepreneurship. So yeah, money coaching was just like, how do I work with people without wealth? The majority of my community does not have wealth. I think it's still true that a Latina earns like 53, 54 cents to the dollar of a white man, regardless of like education. We're still the lowest paid. And also in that same statistic, and this is part of demography. Demography is like holding on to a bunch of different random data and like seeing how does it look like systemically. But also, Latinos have the highest rate of entrepreneurship in the US, and Latina women have the highest rate of entrepreneurship. Because if you're in a system that's like set up to not work for you, you're like, let me step out. Let me go do something else. Because it's not going to take me to where I want to go.
Of all of the like Latina people that I've dated, all of their moms have been entrepreneurs. That's a great statistic. And there's the demography. I am always impressed at how your brain can hold on to like pieces of information and quotes. I'm like, how do you do
I don't
that?
know.
Oh, that's awesome though. And we were talking about you being an entrepreneur, and I know this is something we've talked about as well. Like, how do you balance taking care of yourself while also being an entrepreneur? I mean, you're working more than just one job, but multiple jobs. Um, I know it's all like one big job, but then it's like the third, the third, the third. So, how do you think about balancing your own needs and like factoring yourself in when it comes to also having a career that really is connected to your values in the world that you want to be a part of building?
Yeah. So my most steady source of income is being a financial planner for Strategy Squad. Strategy Squad is a firm out of Oakland in California in the Bay Area, part of Natural Investments. That job landed on my lap 2 months into entrepreneurship, and my commitment to her is a third of my week. And that means that the rest of the week I can spend on a lot of like things that are really important to me, but may not be immediately financially rewarding. And the lack of financial stress of like knowing that a third of my week covers 80% of my cost of living. It doesn't cover like retirement contributions, it doesn't cover travel, but it does cover my food and shelter. That it took me a while for me to realize what a gift that was and for me to allow myself to work at my own pace. I'm 37 and I imagine I'm going to be working another 20, 25 years. But because I really like my work, that sounds great. I also live a lifestyle right now that's very like, I think on average, I work 30 to 35 hours a week. I like everything that I do for work. So my work is not depleting. When my work was depleting, then I did need a lot more rest than I do now, if that makes sense. So, and I think when you, depending on when you ask me this, you'll get a different answer. Like, it's Monday at noon today, and I had a great weekend with friends full of rest and play. And I slept in this morning, like you're finding me at my most well rested. There have, and I think last time we spoke, I shared how I do like the solstice thing. I mean, the solstice and the equinox, that I take a week off every quarter from client meetings. Sometimes it means like a week off, but it's a staycation because vacations, like going off somewhere, is not always as restful as just like staying at home and taking long walks and reading books. And the purpose of it is to just remind myself to slow down, to give myself permission to slow down. And I had joked that that I linked it up with the sun's movements because I'm not in charge of those. I can't change those. Sometimes it happens at inconvenient times and I still want to like continue with the commitment to myself. I'm also experimenting with taking every other Friday off. Wanting to take every Friday off, probably starting in 2026. And just practicing, right? Day by day. How do I want to rest? I've really limited my client times too. That felt really hard at first. But again, if I remind myself that at the end of the day, my food and shelter is covered, that I can take more rest, that's really helpful. And I feel like it's made me more creative. But also, it doesn't even have to produce anything. It can just be like, no, I think another big part of it is that I want everyone to have permission to live like this.
Right. Yeah. And it's like you have more energy because the time spent doing work that's less meaningful or drains you in some capacity, like that takes a lot more energy, I think. That's a belief that I have. I'm so glad you have. Did you have any book recommendations from your latest solstice rest?
I'm reading Nonviolent Communication. It's like a book from the 90s, I think, by Marshall Rosenberg.
Ooh, that sounds really good. This actually kind of ties into what we were just talking about, but I'm curious, especially knowing about how you grew up and how money was thought of as a form of safety. I'm curious how you think about how much is enough. You were also kind of like touching on it. It's like, this is the life that I want to live and the livelihood I want for myself. But yeah, like what type of like returns, in quotes, are you after? How do you think about risk and the future for yourself and the people you love?
Oh my gosh. I think that, so I spend most of my time in Mexico City, and the culture here is very present oriented, which has its upsides and downsides. I feel that it may be easier to get in touch with enough when you're present oriented because it's kind of like when you're having a meal, right? Like, when can you tell that you're full? If you're savoring, if you're eating slowly, if you don't have 1,000 things on your mind. I also feel that it has to be like there needs to be a sense that when you need something next, it'll be available. So I think it changes day by day, but there needs to be a lot of self-trust and like, I guess maybe also community trust, systemic trust that like as you take a step forward, what you need will be provided, which sounds very much like faith. I mean, my faith is a big part of myself, but I don't think it's necessary to be spiritual or to have a church or to be religious in order to feel like you can have enough. I think it needs to be For me, the way that I've answered it is again having a part-time job that takes up a third of my time and covers 80% of my cost of living. Like that is such a like the math of that is so amazing. And also really being in touch with what am I trying to fill with each choice, right? Like what am I asking each thing to do? And what can be answered externally and what can be answered internally. And I think it changed. I don't know. It's a moving target, and it's a pleasure to move after that target to like find out what does enough feel like, and then to continue to dance into it.
Absolutely. Be just curious, since most of the people I ask this question to, and a lot of the clients I work with are predominantly white. So I'm curious, do you notice any like cultural context across like the different clientele that you work with in terms of thinking about enoughness?
Yes, often in communities and cultures that are much more community oriented, everybody needs to have enough in order for one person to feel like they have enough. So like everyone needs to be cared for. That can be a really big part of it. And sometimes it's like, oh, I can't provide for everyone. So there's some grief that needs to be included in there. But I don't know that there's, yeah, as much as I love this question, I think I love it because it feels like a Zen koan. Like, how do you answer it? You know, because I can't eat all the food I'm ever going to eat and then be like, food checked. I can't receive all of the care I'll ever need. Like it's a flow. So how to be in right flow. I think it's much more body oriented than mental, at least for me. One of the things that I found for myself as an entrepreneur, I have a really clear view of my cash flow. What are upcoming expenses? What are the projections of the different streams of income that I have? And I said that I need 6 months of emergency funds. 6 months of emergency funds must be in my account at all time. And I will take risk up to the point that it looks like I have 6 months until I have to start tapping into my emergency fund. And that feels like enough for me. So I
Yeah.
always have like my cash flow shows me like in 6 months, I'm going to be in the red. But 6 months is far enough away where like things will happen. I can find ways. So that self-confidence that I now have, I can find ways because when I started, I had a year. I didn't know that I could find ways to earn extra money, and now I do. And I couldn't have sped up that learning process.
I really hear the like like you built trust in yourself of like, yeah, thought I needed a year. Now it's 6 months. Maybe it'll be different. But it's like
Mm.
we're so adaptable at being able to meet our needs and take care of ourselves. I also like the almost like a guardrail concept of like,
Mm.
okay, I'm gonna like trust this, but there's a guardrail in place to hold me or like the bumpers at the bowling alleys. My
Mhm.
partner's really into bowling, so I'm thinking about bowlings. I also really appreciate how through listening to your show and highly anyone listening, like highly encourage you to go check out
Thank you.
Diana's show because it's amazing. But you were the first person to really connect the dots for me around like the scarcity and like money hoarding to also like our relationship to food and to eating. And
Mhm.
I've shared this publicly in other places. I don't think I have on the show, but I'm someone who has struggled with disordered eating most of my life. And it just made me think a lot about the ways that we police our bodies, as well as like we might have like avoidance or like control tendencies towards our money or our money habits and our ability to feel like satiated. I mean, it's like that enoughness question of like, how much is enough? Like, how much do I need to feel satiated in this moment? So I'm just curious, and you can, I know this is kind of a big, broad question, but can you share a little bit more about that and like where you see similarities between people's relationship to their body and food, as well as their wealth?
Yeah, definitely. And it's literally this morning I was thinking like, do I still want to have my history of disordered eating, my history of bulimia on my newsletter on ramp? Like necessary for people to learn. But for me, just that when I think of voracious capitalism, when I think of the way that we're destroying the planet and that we hurt each other, by some people having incredible amounts and other people experiencing hunger day in, day out. Like I shared that part of my dad's story as a child, and my dad hates to talk about this. I'm sorry, Dad, that I'm like using you as an example. Um, he experienced hunger when other people in his family had more than they needed. And that is such a huge betrayal, right? And if we all are part of the human species and we all share one planet, for me, it feels like a betrayal that there are people who are experiencing so much need. But I also remember what it was like to not be able to stop, to be voracious, and to waste the food that I was eating because I would immediately get rid of it. Right. And I don't know if billionaire capitalists feel voracious, but maybe they do. And maybe I can have empathy for that sense of limitless wanting. The Buddhists have this idea of the hungry ghost, where they have a pin-sized mouth and like a dark hole, empty pit for a stomach. And it's voracious. Anybody who's been in the pits of addiction knows what it feels like to be like, I no longer am in charge. Something else is in charge, something that I can't control. So that's a place that I empathize. That's something that I use to empathize with people who are like, it doesn't matter that I have 40 million. I'm not going to share this with anyone because what if I need it? And I also feel that sometimes we can feel so like this is one place where I have control. I think as a kid, when bulimia was my main tool, that was a thing that I could do. There was so much outside of my world, outside of my life that I had no say over. I couldn't say where I lived. I couldn't dictate other people's emotions or feelings. I could barely dictate my own. And my body was something I could change. I could be in charge of. And a lot of the times money can feel like that, right? Like I can work this much and make this much money. There can sometimes feel like there's a very linear exchange of like, here's my time, here's the money. Money will always do what I think it's going to do. As someone who loves working with numbers, I sometimes, when I've like had a lot of client meetings, I want to go spend some time with a spreadsheet because there's a lot less mystery and surprise, which also is what brings me back to people. But I wonder if money can, just like I was saying, like here I am envisioning that I have 6 months of emergency funds, although I really don't know what's going to happen, right? I could have a part of me that's like very fearful, say, you need a year because you have no idea. Like we don't know what's happening with the world. And I could have another part of me that could be very grandiose of like, remember the times that you've had giant contracts land, like you only really need a month. So it feels that 6 months of cash flow feels like something I have in charge of, but really am I? Like I'm not, right? So like ambivalence is part of life. So thinking about my disordered eating helps me connect with voraciousness. And it also it gives me empathy for like how easy it is to control that or to feel to have the illusion of control.
Yeah. And I know when I was like really in a big spiral around like also trying to control my body, controlling my food, it related to like not feeling like I could trust myself. Like I can't trust myself. I don't trust my body to do the things that I want it to do. And by also building trust and love for myself, I'm actually able to trust myself. I will have like the life or the day, maybe not the life, but the day at least that I want to be having, or I have agency over it. And I'm just because you mentioned this, I'm just like, ooh, I want to like pull on this thread. But you mentioned like that helped you empathize with these people who are, you know, I or someone else might call it hoarding wealth or just, having so much, but not feeling the trust or feeling the ability to move it in a way that can create other types of returns that are non-financial. Mm-hmm. And I think this is really important, is being able to empathize with people that we might portray as our enemies. And I'm just curious how you think about empathy as a strategy for social movements or social justice.
Yeah, I am. So in reading Nonviolent Communication, Marshall Rosenberg, the author, talks about how this way of thinking and talking is really can be very transformative because it's no longer about playing. It's no one else's fault. They're trying to like fill a need. So if I imagine that someone that has way more than they need is filling a need, then I can empathize with their humanity and that can create change. I also, there's this quote by a Greek slave. I think it's Heraclitus. I don't remember the person's name, but nothing human is foreign to me. I love that quote. And it means that I want to have a heart that's big enough to hold everyone in it and to hold all parts of myself that I don't like, right? To no longer reject myself so that at least, because if there's an internal war, if I'm rejecting parts of me or I'm rejecting parts of others, then that like strengthens, that calcifies. And instead of moving towards a solution, I'm making a bigger problem because I'm making more of a push, right? Whereas if you just move out of the way, then you can just move to a different way. Also, for me, moving more into social justice was part of becoming Quaker. I started attending Quaker meetings in 2018 because before that I was really overwhelmed. As someone who grew up on the border, seeing poverty day in, day out, knowing how close it was to my family, not believing in systemic care, right? Like I shared stories of my dad being like, it doesn't work, just let it go, hoard more money. When I became Quaker, the first time I attended a meeting, one of the members shared, how do we keep everyone in our heart, even when they're inciting violence? And this was the weekend after a synagogue had been bombed in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh is like the second biggest city in Pennsylvania, where Philadelphia is. And I was so stunned because many people had shared messages about how devastating it is to see a place of worship be targeted. And when this woman said, how do we keep everyone in our heart? I heard her because of like the juxtaposition of the different messages that had been shared. I heard her saying, how do we keep Trump in our heart? Which is such a mind-boggling question, right? Like, does Trump belong in my heart? Like, does everyone belong in my heart? It's such a huge question. Do you want to have a heart that's that giant? How do you have people in your heart that create tons of pain? But I think it's a lovely question. It's a question that can lead us towards transformation more than just putting someone else in charge.
My whole body recoiled. It's like Trump in my heart, and that like means like Peter Thiel and Jeff Bezos, like
Yeah.
and yes, and also those things that they exhibit also do live within me to some degree.
Well,
Yeah.
and I don't think I really fully answered it. So that question of how do we keep everyone in our heart, that it helped me feel strong enough to start moving into social justice because I grew up Catholic where it was like, how do we keep everyone out of our heart, including ourselves? That was my experience of Catholicism. I'm sure that's not everyone's experience. But the Quaker constant movement towards peace, it's been 400 years that they've been moving towards peace. There's no sight of it coming nearby. And still, they're like hopeful and resilient in doing that work. That really helped me feel safe and joining what I hope is transformation. I don't know if I'll ever get to see it, but I like being part of the movement towards it.
Good seeds that we plant, and thank you. And I really admire that you moved in a direction that still is in some ways like connected to the religion that you were socialized in, and one that feels more true. So as we wrap up, I'll just ask you one more question. If you could wave a magic wand, what do you wish listeners of the show already knew about?
I really love the book Scarcity, Why Having Too Much Means So Little, especially because we were talking about enough. This book was written by, I believe, a couple of psychologists, and they researched on like when people live in scarcity, when they grow up in scarcity, either not enough attention, not enough love, not enough money, what does that do to them? And they did studies all over the world of like, if you are under fictional financial stress, how does that change you? How do people actually like move ahead out of debt traps? So that can be really helpful in thinking of like, how do we create systems where we're no longer trapped in this too much too little dichotomy? Like, how do we create more stability so that we can move on with our life and do something else other than worry about money?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I'm so glad I have you on the show.
Thank you,
Recording.
Jordan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reimagine Wealth podcast. You can find resources and links from today's episode in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, review, subscribe, and share this with those in your community. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a paid member of my Substack, which allows me to sustain this work and have more episodes to share in the future. Again, links to all of that and more are in the show notes. And until next time, I'm sending you resilience and warmth, and thank you so much for tuning in.